Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of history's absolute greatest epics to really understand a massive paradigm shift in warfare. We're looking at how the ultimate strategic deception completely brought down a seemingly indestructible city. For thousands of years, the tale of Troy has captivated us, but today we're going to focus strictly on that incredible, defining pivot from pure brute force to psychological warfare that finally ended the conflict. Let's get right into it.
This brings us to a really staggering central mystery. The sheer tactical impossibility of breaching Troy through traditional military might was absolute. It just wasn't working. So you have to ask yourself, how does a hollow wooden statue achieve what tens of thousands of armed men and 10 straight years of relentless bloodshed completely failed to do? To understand the sheer brilliance of this strategic masterstroke, we actually have to first understand the catastrophic mess that made it necessary.
And it all started with a petty divine grudge. Imagine a golden apple, inscribed with the words, "To the most beautiful." Eris, the goddess of discord, was understandably pretty bitter about being left off a wedding guest list, so she tossed this apple into a feast. This instantly sparked a massive vanity contest among the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus, wanting no part of it, punted the judging to a mortal, Prince Paris of Troy. Aphrodite ended up bribing Paris with the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, Queen of Sparta. So Paris abducts her, completely ignoring the frantic prophecies of his sister, Cassandra. She literally screamed that this act would bring about the destruction of Troy, but Cassandra had been cursed by the god Apollo so that no one would ever believe her warnings.
This abduction set up the ultimate tactical nightmare. We are talking about the classic paradox of the immovable object meeting the unstoppable force. On one side, you have the kingdom of Troy, protected by legendary walls literally built by the gods Poseidon and Apollo. On the other side, a massive, united Greek army. See, years earlier, Helen's many powerful suitors had sworn a binding oath to protect whomever she married. So when she was taken, her husband, King Menelaus, cashed in that oath, assembling the greatest armada the world had ever seen.
The Greeks, or Achaeans, brought unparalleled muscle and mind to the shores of Troy. You had King Agamemnon of Mycenae commanding this mighty fleet. You had Diomedes of Argos, a skilled warrior, and Nestor of Pylos, bringing generations of wisdom. But arguably the most important mind belonged to Odysseus of Ithaca. Now, Odysseus actually wanted to avoid this war so badly, he pretended to be totally insane, mumbling and plowing a field with an ox and a horse. It was only when recruiters tested his sanity by placing his own infant son in front of the plow that the jig was up. Odysseus stopped, proving his sanity, and was drafted. That brilliant, cunning mind of his, that's going to be the key to everything later on.
But despite having all those kings, victory required their ultimate weapon, Achilles. This was a warrior who had exactly one mortal vulnerability on his entire body, his heel. His mother, the goddess Thetis, knew a prophecy that he would die at Troy, so she actually hid him away, disguised in female clothing on an island. And guess who cleverly lured him out of hiding? Odysseus. He brought gifts to the women, including a set of armor, and then suddenly sounded a war horn. While the women fled, Achilles instinctually grabbed the armor, revealing his true identity. With him, the unstoppable force was completely assembled.
But the problem was, they were walking into a literal divine stalemate. The gods themselves took sides in this fight, essentially canceling each other out, with Hera, Athena, and Poseidon backing the Greeks, and Aphrodite, Apollo, and Ares backing the Trojans. The massive Greek offensive just crashed helplessly against Troy's defenses for 9 exhausting, bloody years. It was a complete and total deadlock.
After 9 years of this grinding warfare, the Greek war machine completely broke down. And the culprit wasn't even Trojan weaponry, it was the high cost of pride. Just to get supplies, the Greeks had been raiding neighboring towns and taking slaves. Commander Agamemnon was eventually forced to return his captured slave girl to appease the god Apollo. So in a massive ego trip, Agamemnon demanded Achilles' captive Briseis as a replacement. Achilles was deeply disrespected. He actually drew his sword, but was stopped by Athena. So instead, he simply walked away. The greatest warrior in the world withdrew from the battlefield entirely, crippling the Greek forces.
Desperate to break this stalemate, they tried some alternative solutions. First, a peaceful duel between Helen's 2 husbands, Paris and Menelaus. Menelaus was winning easily, but Aphrodite literally whisked Paris away from the battlefield in a magic cloud. Then, we see a disastrous return to brute force. Achilles' best friend, Patroclus, put on Achilles' armor to scare the Trojans. It worked temporarily, but Troy's greatest prince, Hector, stood his ground and killed Patroclus, which completely shifted the momentum of the war once again.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of brute force in this conflict. Grief-stricken, Achilles received new armor forged by the gods and returned to the field in a blinding rage. He just slaughtered his way all the way to the gates of Troy, where Prince Hector made a final, tragic stand. Achilles killed him, tied his body to a chariot, and dragged it around the city walls while Hector's family watched in sheer horror. It was only when Troy's elderly king Priam snuck into the Greek camp and begged at Achilles' feet that the body was finally returned. But here is the most crucial takeaway from all of this. Even this terrifying display of ultimate unchecked violence didn't bring the Greeks a single inch closer to actually getting inside those walls.
And then, suddenly, the unstoppable force lost its edge. As Achilles prepared to scale the walls, Paris, guided by the god Apollo, fired a poisoned arrow, striking him in the only mortal part of his body, his heel. Achilles died. Paris was swiftly hunted down and killed in return. So now, with both sides' greatest heroes totally gone, a massive strategic vacuum opened up. Force had totally, demonstrably failed them.
And this brings us right to the core of our explainer today, the paradigm shift. Think about it. For 10 years, Phase 1 was defined by brute force, colossal armies, divine intervention, and staggering casualties, and it all resulted in a total standstill. They absolutely needed a radically new strategy. So, Phase 2 introduces deception. If they couldn't break the walls from the outside, they had to hack the enemy's psychology to bypass the walls entirely.
Let's look at the weapon that actually won the war. Cunning. Skill in achieving one's ends by deceit or evasion. And who better to deploy this than Odysseus? Remember, this is the guy who feigned madness to avoid the war in the first place. Odysseus realized the Greeks were basically trying to solve an architectural problem with swords. The true strategic masterstroke here was realizing that Troy's greatest vulnerability wasn't a weak point in the stone, it was the Trojans' sheer exhaustion and their desperate hope for peace.
So Odysseus drafts this incredibly brilliant multi-step psychological trap. Step 1, construct a massive hollow wooden horse and hide an elite strike team inside, including himself, Menelaus, and Diomedes. Step 2, have the Greek army burn their camp and sail away just out of sight, totally feigning a full retreat. Step 3 is where the strategy gets truly devious. They present the magnificent structure as a divine peace offering. This preyed perfectly on Trojan psychology. They wanted the war to be over so badly, they willingly became the instruments of their own defeat, dragging the horse inside their own impenetrable gates. And step 4, just wait for nightfall.
But there was one last, tragic roadblock in the way, Cassandra. She saw the horse, she knew it was a trap, and she desperately begged her people to burn it. But because of Apollo's curse, her warnings were totally dismissed as the mad ravings of a cursed prophet. The irony here is just terrifying. The Trojans were so thoroughly out-strategized by the illusion of victory that they celebrated while literally pulling their own doom right into the city center.
The pacing of what happens next is truly chilling. The Trojans drink themselves to sleep, celebrating the end of a 10-year nightmare. At midnight, there's absolute silence. Odysseus and his men slide out of the belly of the horse. Minutes later, the stealth operation turns lethal. They silently slaughter the remaining guards and throw open the mighty gates of Troy from the inside. They signal with fire, and hours later, the entire Greek fleet, having turned around in the dark, floods into the city. Troy is completely set ablaze before most of its citizens even wake up.
What followed was total, merciless devastation. The strategy was surgical, but the aftermath was an absolute bloodbath. King Priam was ruthlessly slain at an altar by Achilles' son, Pyrrhus. And to ensure the royal bloodline was completely severed, Pyrrhus actually tore Hector's infant son Astyanax from his mother's arms and threw him to his death from the very walls Hector had died defending. Hector's wife, Andromache, was taken into slavery. Out of the ashes, only a few managed to flee, most notably Aeneas, who led a small group of survivors to Italy, eventually laying the groundwork for the founding of Rome.
You might think the Greeks just celebrated and went home, but the victors absolutely did not escape the horror of this war. The tragedy cascaded right onto them. During the sack, the Greek warrior Ajax the Lesser violated Cassandra in Athena's temple. In a fury, Athena and Poseidon shattered his ship with lightning and drowned him on the voyage home. When King Agamemnon returned to Mycenae, he was brutally assassinated in his bed by his own wife, Clytemnestra. She had never forgiven him for sacrificing their daughter, Iphigenia, just to secure the winds to sail to Troy a decade earlier. And Odysseus, the brilliant architect of the victory? Well, he wouldn't see his home for another 10 long, grueling years, facing a terrifying odyssey just to get back.
10 years of slaughter versus one night of deception. It forces us to completely reevaluate the entire epic, doesn't it? The greatest heroes in mythology, Achilles, Hector, Patroclus, fought, bled, and died for a decade and achieved absolutely nothing structurally. The indestructible walls of Troy held firm against godlike strength. Yet the strategic brilliance of the wooden horse, literally a single night of weaponized deceit, cracked the city wide open.
Which leaves us with this final, really haunting question. When you look at the sheer scale of the devastation, the murdered children, the assassinated kings, and the drowned victors, was a decade of devastating bloodshed truly worth the victory? Or does the enduring legacy of the wooden horse simply prove that in the end, human cunning is always deadlier than the sword? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you view the incredible story of Troy.